All right. I mentioned last week that we are going to be talking this week about the destruction of Jerusalem. Well, I'm a little wrong. We're actually going to talk about the years leading up to the destruction of Jerusalem. And I'm pretty sure, given the amount of time we have, we're not going to even get to that part yet. So I want to start, though. I told Chase, I said, every time he comes, we talk about history or non-Bible stuff. And so I said, I am going to actually pull out a Bible verse today, just so it'll kind of make things right. I want to start, though, by going back to Daniel. Remember when we talked about Daniel giving this number of years? And we did a little bit of a countdown to say, give a guesstimate. And that guesstimate is all I can be sure of because of the way that the years were counted and whatnot. So we went through those years counting down to when the Messiah showed up on the scene, and how the Jews, if they chose to look into it and chose to really consider it, they could have known, they should have known about the time, if not the exact time, when Jesus the Messiah would show up. But those who didn't care, those who weren't looking, missed it. Well, I want to go back to that passage because in that passage, it talks about another set of sevens. Remember, our countdown was based on a number of sets of sevens, and we talked about those sevens being years. And so let's go back. It's Daniel chapter 9, and it's at the very end of Daniel chapter 9. I'm going to read verse 22 all the way through the end, but then we'll just highlight a couple of those. Daniel chapter 9, starting in verse 22. This is an explanation that was given to Daniel about, I'm going to say the end, about the end. Now, that's all I'm going to say about what is the end, because that's kind of where we're headed with all of this conversation. There are different views on what this means. And I've expressed part of my view, and I'm going to continue to express my view, although we're going to give you all the views in the next several weeks. Verse 24, 77s are decreed for your people. Now again, we talked before that is sets of 7 years. 70 sets of 7 years are decreed for your people and your holy city to finish transgression, to put up an end to sin, to atone for wickedness, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place. Blend all of this with what we have just recently talked about, Jesus saying the end of the Jewish experiences is coming. And especially we talked last week about the end of Jerusalem and how Jerusalem is going to be destroyed. Okay, keep that in mind as we read through this as well. Verse 25, know and understand this. From the time the word goes out to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the Anointed One, the ruler, comes, there will be 7 sevens and 62 sevens. Okay, so we talked before about 69 sevens, and that's how we did the little countdown to basically when the Messiah would arrive on the scene. It will, Jerusalem, after the command went out to restore and rebuild Jerusalem, it will be rebuilt with streets and a trench, but in times of trouble. And that would be done in probably, we estimate or guesstimate, the times of Nehemiah. After the 62 sevens, the Anointed One will be put to death and will have nothing. We talked about that being the Messiah and Jesus coming on the scene. The people of the ruler who will come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. Oh, now it's starting to seem a little more familiar with what we've only recently talked about, the destruction of Jerusalem. The people of the ruler who will come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end will come like a flood. War will continue until the end, and desolations have been decreed. He will confirm a covenant with many for 1 7. That is 1 set of 7 years. In the middle of the 7, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering. And at the temple, he will set up, and this is how my translation reads it. At the temple, he will set up an abomination that causes desolation until the end that is decreed is poured out on him. Now, I have a footnote that says it could be rendered this way. One who causes desolation will come upon the wing of the abominable temple, until the end that is decreed is poured out on the desolated city. So, I can't lick it and stick it. I'm postulating here. This one set of 7, as I stand today, and again, I cannot stand firmly, but I'm thinking that it represents essentially a time period stretching from somewhere in the middle of AD 66 to somewhere in the middle of 73 or 74. 7 years. Could be the end of 66 to stretching into 74. I am overlaying some things we know about the Jewish wars with the 7 years and how things are described here. What we're going to find out is that right here in the middle, in AD 70, that's the time Jerusalem and the temple is flattened. It's destroyed. If we take that set of 7 years, right in the middle, Jerusalem and the temple is destroyed, and put it back into Daniel, notice he says, in the middle of the 7, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering. Well, if the temple's gone, it's the end of sacrifice and offering. There are a lot of people that look at this as a still future event. And they talk about the 7 years of tribulation, for instance. And there's even this idea, and we'll talk a little later about the various ideologies of end times. But there are some who say there's a 7 years of tribulation, and there will be an event before either, depends on who you are, either before the 7 years, in the middle of the 7 years, or after the 7 years. Now, we're getting into Revelation when we talk through that. But if we look at this, there's a 7-year period, and there's something that occurs in the middle. So I just want to kind of caution you, they may all be talking about the same thing. If they are, I would suggest Daniel specifically is talking about this period. It overlays very well with what we're talking about here. Because Daniel is being instructed about essentially the time the Messiah comes and the end of the Old Covenant. So that's the verse I'm going to bring to you, and I'm going to pull it out. I wanted to address that because what I want to talk about now, today, and we'll see how far we get today, is a time period from about middle of 66 to beginning of AD 70. This is more history. This isn't necessarily Bible study, but that context, that understanding of what happened helps us understand the Bible and how it presents itself. So in a sense, it is Bible study, but only to the extent that it's helping us have that foundational understanding of what the Bible says. So what we're going to do is we're going to start by talking about what's going on in the world in AD 66, 67, in the Roman Empire. And when I say the world, we're talking about the known world of their location, the Roman Empire. And then we're going to move into the Jewish experience at that time. And there is a lot that was going on in Jerusalem that I think the bulk of Christianity especially, but the bulk of the world is not attuned to. They don't even know happened. So I want to address some of those things so that we can get an idea of how devastating this experience was. And I'm going to say even before the Romans came in, before this point. Okay? So I want to talk through some of that. So let's start. There's going to be a lot of names in the conversation today. I'll try to write them down so that we can keep them straight. Yes, ma'am.
Are you going to get into this, the last part of 27 there, Daniel? About what's going to be set up in the temple? Are you going to get into that?
Probably not today, but we will touch on it.
I'll wait.
Although we will address some things that to me speak well of that. I don't have a firm foundation on precision. Exactly what that is entailing, what it means, who did what. Now, I will tell you, the Jews look at this and they see the desolation, the abomination of desolation, as being when Antiochus Epiphanes, in the middle 100s BC, came in and sacrificed pigs on the altar in the temple. That push for Hellenism that he was behind, and he desecrated the temple. He sacrificed pigs on the altar, and the Jews will look at that as that's the abomination of abomination of desolation. 3 years later, the temple was purged, everything was cleaned up, and they celebrate that victory in Hanukkah. So that's what they will say. It's interesting because in Matthew 24, Jesus says, be aware of and be looking for the abomination of desolation. And then Matthew puts in parentheses, from Daniel or let the reader understand. And so we'll talk about it again. It may not be today, but there are some things that occur in the temple that sure make you go, Okay? All right, so first, what's going on in Rome? Has anyone heard, and I know you all have, but have you heard of the name Nero? Nero was not good for Rome. He wasn't good for Christians. We know that Nero had initiated heavy persecution on the Christians. He wasn't really very good for Jews either, but he was horrible as a Roman leader. A lot of the things he did devastated the treasury, the Roman treasury. He didn't really support the people. He got to be, in fact, the Roman Senate eventually basically made him public enemy number one, even though he was the Caesar. So he wasn't really good for Rome. During his reign, a lot of the outlying peoples in the Roman Empire thought this is a good time to rise up and to rebel. And so, although Rome had relative peace throughout much of the 1st century BC and 1st century AD, when it comes to Nero, that's when people started kind of getting unsettled. And what we see is we start seeing essence of civil war within the Roman Empire and external war with all of the rebellions that happen outside or on the periphery or the edges of the Roman Empire. We can read about Britain and Gaul and how they started rebelling against Rome. We know that there were lots of different areas that had uprisings. The Jews was one of them. Okay, so that's going to be where we put our hooks. But Nero was Caesar until 68. AD 68. So let me just put a list. There was a rapid succession of Roman leadership in the year 68. Most of the Caesars had a long imperial, governance. But after Nero, there was a rapid succession of, we see that it changed hands 4 times. Okay, so we start out with Nero. Nero is the one who was at the helm when Peter and Paul died. Okay, he died in 68. Oh, I will say Josephus, a lot of what I talk about is going to be rooted in Josephus, although there were other historians that also supplement and corroborate what Josephus says. Josephus was a Jewish historian that cooperated with Roman empires, the Roman Caesars, the Roman imperialists. And we'll talk about his role as we move into this a little bit. But a lot of what I talk about comes from him. And he wrote, now at this time there was a great concussion of affairs happened. The affairs of the Romans were themselves in great disorder. So he acknowledges the Roman world was just in disarray. Okay, so Nero's troubled reign invited a lot of outside people to reject the Roman rule. In late 68, Nero committed suicide. When he committed suicide, a man named Galbo was designated emperor. So let me put his name, Galbo. Now, Galbo was almost immediately hated. Remember, we talked about the rebellions from outside worlds, outside entities. Nero put down some of those rebellions, and the officers that were in charge of putting down those rebellions didn't get the credit they deserved under Galbo. And so he wasn't well regarded anyway, but the leaders of those armies, one of them was replaced by Galbo, but the armies themselves said, we don't recognize Galbo. He didn't do us justice. He didn't do right by us. And so what they did, and we're talking about the German army, the Roman legions that were in what we know of as Germany, the Germanic area. I'm going to put his name down here. Vitellius. Vitellius was, Galbo designated Vitellius, I believe it's Galbo, as the governor of that area, of the Germanic area. Well, the army didn't like Galbo, so the army said, no, Vitellius is our emperor. Make sure I have this right. Yes, and they start marching on Rome. No, I'm sorry. Galbo was killed. See, this is what happens when I have too many notes. He was hated. The German legions didn't like it. They did declare Vitellius to be their emperor. But in 69, Galbo was killed by his own guard. Okay, so obviously very much hated. So Galbo was killed in very early 69. Oh, oops, killed. So he didn't last long. Okay. The end of 68, Nero committed suicide. The beginning of 69, Galbo was killed. The Senate immediately made Otho the new Caesar, the new emperor. But the legions in Germany had already said Vitellius is the leader. Vitellius is the emperor. And they start marching on Rome with Vitellius at the head. Otho hears about it and goes, oh no, I don't really want to fight. But he did. He fought a little bit, not much, but a little bit. Won a few minor battles, but was really defeated in one. And he ended up killing himself. That was in 69. Suicide. So Vitellius marches on into Rome. And of course the Senate goes, okay, you're the new emperor. But Vitellius, I told you finances were already low. Under Nero, he kind of messed with the coffers of the kingdom. Vitellius started doing things that nearly bankrupt the Roman treasury. And so the bankers started recalling their loans. Well, Vitellius didn't like that, and so Vitellius went on a killing spree. Nobody likes a new emperor who goes on a killing spree. And so, while he's in Rome doing all of this, there are other people, other armies in the Roman world that say, no, Vitellius is not for us. So they say this guy named Vespasian is their emperor. So you have another set of Roman troops who are, the Roman troops in Germany said this guy, but all across the rest of the region, all across the rest of the Roman Empire, other troops are saying, no, this guy. Well, this guy decides to go home. This guy hears that he's on his way home, But before he even makes it home, there are other Roman troops that come in and do battle. And Vitellius ends up being caught and killed. They do battle, lose. Vitellius goes back home. He finally comes in, his troops, they catch him in the palace and kill him. So, 69, he's killed. Vespasian, 69, yay! Everyone likes Vespasian. Vespasian actually is a ruler from 69 to 79. So he finally, things settle down after Vespasian and things go underway. Why do I say all this? Well, see all of this craziness happening in the Roman world right now. Well, that craziness helps other nations kind of rise up. You know, when the home territory is having trouble, now's a good time to rise up and cause more trouble, right? Vespasian is the guy who Nero had picked to march on the Jews, which is why he was in the Jewish area around that time. Okay. So I just wanted to kind of lay that out. Crazy things in the Roman Empire going on at the same time that we're going to start talking about crazy things going on in Jerusalem. I'm going to erase this because we have other names to write down. You didn't know you were coming to history class today, did you? So notice that was 68. Trouble started for the Jews earlier than that. So again, it's Nero. And again, he wasn't a very good financial organizer. And so high taxation caused people across the entire Roman world to kind of get their danders up, including the Jews. It prompted an attitude against Rome, a rising attitude of, we don't like Rome. Now that was already existing in the early first century when Jesus was talking, all the taxation and those tax collectors. We don't like the tax collectors. That disposition was already there. But it got worse because Rome found a need for more money. And where do you get more money? The people you conquer. So things kind of got worse even for the Jews after Jesus came and went in and around 33 AD. And I won't just lick and stick that date. It's just that's the time frame that we usually talk about in the Bible. So let's go back to 66. What happened in 66? There's a fella. You remember the name Pontius Pilate? Okay. Who was he? The governor. He was the Roman procurator in the area of Judea. He was the one responsible, one might say governor, that's kind of the role he took, of that area, the Roman governor of that area, and he facilitated taxes in that area. He facilitated keeping the peace in that area, which we know was problematic for him at the time of Jesus. That's the role this person took. Based in Caesarea, that's on the coast. Not too far from Jerusalem, but it's on the coast. Skip several years from Pontius Pilate, because he didn't last that long after the story of Jesus. We now have another one. Actually, we had several, but now there's one called Florus. Florus. Florus did not like the Jews. Now, the Jews were not an easy people to like. They were rambunctious, as we have read and we've talked about before. Florus found ways and times to prod the Jews to rebel. Okay, so there was a time in 66 when a group of Hellenists in Caesarea, not Jerusalem, but in Caesarea, you had Jews living there as well. And they had a synagogue there. There were also a lot of Hellenists, remember those people who lived with the Greek aspirations in mind, that also lived in Caesarea. Well, they already had an internal struggle between them. And Florus kind of incited it. He encouraged it. So some Hellenists got together one Sabbath and decided to sacrifice some birds on a pot at the doorway of the synagogue there in Caesarea. Well, that rendered the synagogue unclean, and the Jews could no longer practice their Sabbath rituals or studies on their holy day. That was probably the first striking moment that lit a fire. The Jews some of the Jews went to Florus and said, "Can you help us in this matter?" He said, "Yeah, for money I'll help you." Well, he took the money, but he didn't help. And in fact, when an uprising happened, Florus actually imprisoned those who came to him and said, "Can you help us?" So instead of using the money to help, he took the money and imprisoned them anyway. In addition, Florus went to Jerusalem and he took 17 talents out of the temple treasury, the sacred treasury in the temple, saying that Nero needed it, the Caesar needed it. Whether he did or not, there was no explanation. Agrippa came back in and kind of calmed the people down, and they ended up taking a collection and sending it to Florus as well. But when he came in and took the 17 talents, the Jews in Jerusalem mocked Florus. They passed around a basket saying, "Florus is poor. He's like a beggar. He needs to come and get money." So they were mocking Rome. They were mocking Florus. Florus didn't like it. So there was continual contention between Florus and the Jewish people, especially those in Jerusalem. Florus retaliated by sending in soldiers, 3,000 soldiers, and no, it wasn't 3,000. I don't remember how many it was. He sent in soldiers, and they plundered the upper city. The upper city, Jerusalem, kind of looks like that. You've got the Temple Mount. You've got the lower city, which is also called City of David. And then you've got the upper city, which also had the Herod's palaces. Okay, so Caesarea is way over here on the coast. And so he came in and he plundered the upper city and killed about 3,600 people, according to Josephus. Now, some people will say that Jerusalem didn't house very many people. Some people go as low as within 10,000. Some people say 20,000, but there are estimates that are above that. If you look at Josephus' numbers, it would have to be more than that, because definitely more than that died. Okay, but according to Josephus' number, it was 3,600 people. So Florus continued to stir up these passions. Agrippa came back, tried to calm things down, wasn't very successful. So Agrippa decided, you know what, I'm going home. And Agrippa's home was up in Galilee. And so he went home. Then there was a guy named Eleazar ben Ananias. Eleazar, son of Ananias. Ananias was one of the high priests. Now, we're talking about a time when the high priest was not the high priest for their lifetime. They were set up as high priests for a certain amount of time until they either became out of disfavor, into disfavor by Herod, or the time was right for political reasons. So you had a succession of high priests, all of them within a certain time span. They were all alive. You remember, even in Jesus' day, Caiaphas was the high priest, but everyone looked to Annas. Annas was the high priest beforehand, but Rome deposed Annas of that position and made Caiaphas the high priest. So you can have multiple high priests within a scope of time, even though they're living. It was originally set up like a Supreme Court thing. Your Supreme Court justices are justices for life. But when we get to this time, they may only be high priests for a few years. You never know. But Eleazar was son of one of the high priests. Well, Eleazar, we're going to say, was anti-Roman. Ananias wasn't. Ananias was really more moderate. He would like to see things kind of go status quo. And we've talked about that too. A lot of the Pharisees liked status quo. Why? Because of Rome, they were in a pretty good position to continue their perspective of Jewish religion, which gave them a lot of freedom. It gave them a lot of money. It gave them a lot of political power. So status quo was good for a lot of people. But remember, we have a high taxation and a lot of young people are starting to rebel. Eliezer was kind of one of these young people, and he wanted to rebel. So what he did to Florus and actually to Rome is his position was called governor of the temple. Best I can tell, it basically is a high-ranking official. Sometimes people say, well, it's the second in command at the temple, second to the high priest. I don't know how true that is, but high-ranking. He convinced the priests not to take any sacrifice that was devoted to the health and well-being of anyone foreign. Okay, there was a practice that you could sacrifice for the health and well-being of people in foreign entities. And there was one that was, by practice, devoted to the Roman emperor. Okay? And he basically said, don't take any sacrifices devoted to or by foreign entities. Well, that was to cut off that was basically telling Rome, we're no longer expressing an interest or a concern for our Roman overlords. So it would incite a Roman reprisal. So what happens is there becomes a civil war in Jerusalem between the anti-Romans and the more moderate folk. We're back here. We're still here. And now Jerusalem is experiencing a civil war, Jew against Jew. What we're going to find out, we don't have time to walk through all of this, so we're going to carry this over to next week. That civil war in various facets continues all the way up to AD 70. A lot of people die in Jerusalem not because of the Romans. They die because of their fellow Jews. That's something I think a lot of people don't know. The moderates send to Florus for help against the anti-Romans. So now the moderate people are saying, Florus, can you help us? Florus says no, but they also send to King Agrippa. King Agrippa sends 3,000 troops, 3,000 horsemen and soldiers to Jerusalem to help in this little skirmish. So what we have is the moderates and King Agrippa's, probably misspelled that, are kind of cloistered in the upper city. The anti-Romans find themselves more or less in the temple area, and then they have this lower city down here. Eventually, the anti-Romans get the upper hand, and they push these folks into the upper palaces. There's a palace complex. And so they come in and they conquer that area, push all of the people there to hole up in another set of buildings that's in the palace complex. They burn Ananias' home. They burn the lower parts of the palace. And they burn what's the name of it? Archives. They call it the archives. They burn the archives. It's the place where loan contracts are stored. So if I'm a commoner or if I'm a landowner and I need a loan from the government, I will go and I will secure that loan. That contract will be stored in these archives. When they burn the archives, there's no longer evidence that that loan exists. And so the thought is, they would encourage all of these other people to join their cause. They will, make them like them. And it didn't actually work, but that was their thinking. Also, you will read about these people called Sicarii. Sicarii are people who carry a sword underneath their garments, their cloak. They were robbers, and technically speaking, they would go about and they would kill people and kind of hide the evidence, rob them, and no one would know the wiser. And they would do this in broad daylight in large groups. And what they would do, I think, is they would kill someone and then they would act like, how terrible, who would do such a thing? And so people would think, oh, well, you're with us then. Kind of strange. But with the help of the Sicarii, they pushed all these people into the cloistered them in other areas. I'm going to get down to, well, we'll just keep going. After this, pushing them out, there was a fortress that Rome had. Remember the Antonia fortress? We talked about a Roman garrison being on site at the temple to make sure that, especially Passover times, were peaceful. Well, these anti-Romans, after doing all this, they attacked the soldiers that were in the garrison that was in the Antonia fortress. So much so that they defeated it. The Romans were scared. I couldn't get clearly what happened to the Romans. I think some of them were killed, but then others were just kind of kept there. Eventually probably killed in the process. So now you have no Roman guard in Jerusalem to help with any of the the skirmishes. Another man named Manahem, Manahem, had gone to Masada. Masada is one of those fortresses that Herod the Great built years ago. He had armaments stored there. Well, this man went there, broke into the armory, collected a lot of the arms, and marched on Jerusalem and came back presenting himself as a king. So he had a following, and he presented himself as a king. Well, he ended up becoming the leader of the anti-Romans. Okay? Anti-Romans. But he ended up being a tyrant, and he killed Ananias. Well, Eleazar didn't like that. So Eleazar ended up killing, and his group ended up killing Manahem. At this point, the citizenry was hoping that peace would be restored. And in fact, there was a cohort of Roman people, a Roman guard named Metellus, that came in and said, we will give you, a peaceful transition. We will make sure, you can come out of the city. No one's going to jail. Let's just make this work. And then Eleazar and his crew agreed, but then turned traitor and attacked him and killed him. So, nice but not nice. And the people, remember, we still have a citizenry here that are kind of stuck in the middle. This stuff is happening around them every day. On that same day that Eleazar defeated this Roman guard that came in, and it wasn't that many soldiers, but they came in and said, let's peacefully make this work. On the same day Eleazar killed them, in Caesarea, remember Caesarea is where Florus lived. In Caesarea, the Greek people, the Hellenist people, rose up and killed a lot of Jews. In fact, the number that I have is 20,000 Jews in Caesarea. That might be an inflation. Excuse me. It might be an exaggeration. We know that was kind of the type of writing at the time, to exaggerate, to really emphasize certain things. So we're not sure exactly of the numbers, but at the same time, a lot. A lot of Jews were attacked. As they tried to get out, Florus caught them, the Jews, as they were trying to escape. Florus caught them and sent these Jews to prison ships. That ignited across all of the Jewish nation, the Jewish nation, an uprising. People, the Jews nationwide were enraged, and they started turning on their own towns. And so what we end up with is a civil war, not just in Jerusalem, but a civil war all across the Jewish territories. We have anti-Romans who are passionate about what's going on, killing people, more peace-oriented people who really want status quo to stay the same, everything to stay the same. They want status quo. So you have a civil war in the nation of Israel, or within the people of Israel, not just in Jerusalem, but across the every city and every town. They were suspicious. Everyone was suspicious of everyone else. Josephus tells us that 13,000 people were killed in the city of Scythopolis. If you travel from Jerusalem up to anywhere in Galilee, you would pass through Scythopolis. It's a town just off of the Jordan River, south of the Sea of Galilee. And it was a major crossroads. And it was also a Gentile, or one of the Decapolis, one of the big 10 cities. But you would pass through there to get to other places in Galilee. Well, 13,000 people, Jews, were killed there. Not just, I don't think just Jews, but 13,000 people. So if you just get this picture, we're still here. We're still in 66. And you can see what's going on to the Jewish experience in 66. We haven't even made it to 70. We haven't even made it to the bad stuff in Jerusalem. It gets worse. Okay, so next week we're going to start talking about other people coming in and other people doing things in Jerusalem, more people dying, and this is all before Rome even gets there. And when I say Rome, I mean, I erased his name, but Vespasian, what I'd written here. Before Vespasian, who was told by Nero to go kill this uprising, before he even gets there. In fact, Vespasian doesn't even know about this yet. Yeah. But this is what's going on with the Jewish experience in 66. So, to kind of loop around to where I started, and again, I can't stand firmly on this, but I have a suspicion in the back of my head, thinking through this. When we talk about a 7-year tribulation from the book of Revelation, there are people who say Revelation is still yet to come. There are people who say Revelation has already occurred. People who say Revelation wasn't written until the 90s. People who say, no, really Revelation was written before 80-70. Well, if it was written before 80-70, and if it was really a dialogue about the Jewish experience, that 7-year tribulation could be talking about this 7 years that seems to match what Daniel says. So I just kind of want to plant a seed, not because I'm going to be assertive about it, but at the same time I want you to think about, bad things are happening. Rome didn't just come and conquer Jerusalem. There was a lot of things going on in the Jewish time, and we just talked for 40 minutes about AD 66, and it gets worse.
Thinking about it, Apostle John was in prison at the end of his life, and this is where a lot of his writings were done. So Revelation is one of his writings, so that would put that in the probably the late first century.
That is the explanation of a lot of people. It is not necessarily the explanation that I would give, but that is the more common explanation. Yes. Yeah. Something to think about, huh? All right, so we'll pick up there. We want to continue. I want to continue this. I want to give you an understanding of what's going on with the Jewish experience so that when we get back to Matthew 24, some of that other stuff that Jesus talks about seems to fit a little better. Maybe. But we'll see. But I think my son always talks about, I'm very interested in context. Give me the context. And you guys know that. This is part of the context of the discussion. And I think it's very important for us to grab it. So let's pray and we'll be dismissed. Lord, thank you so much for today. Thank you for your protection, for your love, for your patience, and Father, most of all, for redemption. Help us as we live in this world to consider how this world affects our devotion to you. And as we learned in Greg's sermon this morning about Job and the things that occurred to him and the surroundings and events that happened to him, how it didn't cause him to waver from his love for you. And Father, may that be us. May we look at the world around us and the things that are occurring, and even though they seem bad to us right now, help them to help us to not waver because of them. Help us to always look to you and to love you and to express our gratitude to you and to shine your light to the world around us. Thank you, Father, for the texts of history, for our Bible, for the people who wrote down the occurrences that happened way back in those times, but also for some of the writings that lie outside of our Bible that corroborate and help us understand the context that the Bible speaks within, and help us to engage with those writings in ways that help us to get better insight and better understanding of you and of your glory and your power and your plan. Father, thank you so much for your plan for redemption and for the eternity that is ours through your Son. It's in him we pray. Amen.